Episode 70.
70 episodes in, and we haven't missed a beat.
Guys, thanks for sticking with us.
Amen. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Last week, I had this experience that just led to this podcast episode. Somebody had given me this sort of off the cuff, I charge $150 an hour for my services. And he was very new in business, had been doing this for about maybe 1 to 2 years. And, he was not in a very sophisticated market. It wasn't like he was welding pipes underwater or something like that. Like it was you could go replicate what he was
consultant, lawyer, right?
He could go off.
Wasn't one of those.
You could go off and put $1,000 in and replicate his business. And it made me think of, so often we talk about on this podcast, don't undervalue your services. But when you don't have experience, sometimes we discount the value of experience and how hard experience is to come by. And what is your value is something we all want to know. And sometimes it's just so easy to just gloss over and think that, with the going rate. And so let's lean into it a little bit today.
Yeah.
Get into determining your value. And I think we're really speaking to people that don't have a ton of experience, right?
Yeah. And I think too, like if you're a listener and you do have quite a bit of experience, I still think that this podcast can be super beneficial to you because, everybody in this space knows somebody with less experience. Maybe it's an apprentice on your team. Maybe it's somebody you know. Maybe you know another builder or contractor who knows a lot of people, So I think this episode is one that can really advance the industry, or help iron sharpen iron,
Yeah.
and get better in the space.
Yeah, and if you're just out there to make a quick buck and you don't care about having a company of integrity and you're not trying to build something that your kids would be proud of, your spouse would be proud of, like you just turn the podcast off because I think we get into things that are not based off of just market conditions of what you can charge, but how do you really build to the point of having something that is you're building a reputation, you're building a company that you can be proud of.
Yeah, good point.
So let's get into it.
I think one of the things we talked about just as we were prepping for this episode is, and we talk about it a lot, of just like how easy it is to oversimplify things. We as people have a tendency
we don't do that.
Never do that.
Oh,
I never promise things that I can't get to because I think it's going to be easier than it is to get there. But why? Why do you think that is? Like, why is that systemic and so common?
It's human nature. We don't know what we don't know. And I think back of my experiences as a kid, and just ready to conquer the world, probably 11, 12 years old, and just thinking like, well, how hard could that be? I don't know anything about it. So you watch somebody else. And I think the other part about it is experience is very deceptive and seeing other people's experiences. If you watch a professional sport and you see somebody that just is an amazing athlete and it looks so effortless, you watch a tennis player, you watch a golf player, we expect the ball to go in the hole.
Yeah.
It's like, he missed, what? Football plays.
Right. And you probably, I think even seeing it on social media and video and YouTube has probably actually caused a lot of that, just that tendency to oversimplify things because you see the master electrician, carpenter, whatever, fulfill, a certain project and you're like, oh, wow, they did it. But you didn't see all the cuts, or all the clips that they had to cut out of the video to actually get that seamless, really quick process.
Dude, perfect.
Yeah, right.
It's every ball in the hole.
Yeah.
How hard is it, guys?
Right.
Just do it.
Yeah.
I had an experience like this where I was working on a project around my house and I needed to cut. I was doing building a window seat in our master bedroom, and there was a cut that I had made that just getting all the trim installed, and it just was fitting together beautifully. Every cut fit perfectly. The point is not to brag on myself. The point is, as I'm thinking about how good I am, Benjamin, give yourself a pat on the back.
Watch your ego.
Yes. Listen, kick this guy off the show.
We talk about humility, Ben.
Yeah, right. No, but I'm okay. Indulge me for a second, please.
Okay, go for it.
But I'm thinking to myself, also in that moment of all of the moments where I had made wrong cuts in order to get to that point. So of all the tens of thousands of cuts I've made in my life, that was the culmination of those experiences to get to the point where that thing just fit like a glove. Yeah. And sometimes as newbies into something that we've never done before, we sort of discount that and we just think, how hard could it be? And also the smarter you are, the more capable you are, the more belief you have in yourself, the easier it is to discount this.
True. Good point.
Very driven, very capable people make this mistake, probably more common than people that are doubting themselves. A lot of times, you might be listening to this thinking, well, I don't do that because you doubt yourself. You're thinking that you assume things will be hard. But for the more driven players, you're saying, well, I'm going to crush it every single day. How hard could it be? And I'm, I've worked with people like that. I've been that person.
Yeah. You shared a story too about your son and just like how, like, if you're asking him to clean out your car or something like that. What was that story that you were sharing earlier?
Well, I think that was around my 10-year-old, who is very capable, very smart, but he's 10.
Yeah.
And so when he's doing something for the first time, there's a certain level of, if he's going to tell me, Dad, I'm going to go do this and it's going to be, great. I have this certain, okay, well, go get him, son. I'm not going to try to tell him like, oh, that's going to be a lot harder.
Yeah.
And I think that's an element of when you're new to something and you're not charging $150 an hour, you get some of that leniency of just like the guy's getting, his feet under him. He's learning something new. You get a lot more grace. And so there's a level of like humility as a part of that. I think that's really the point of that story is really my son's going to say, I'm going to clean your car. It's going to be, and if the value is also $20, not $400 or whatever.
Or $150 an hour.
Right.
Yeah. I think one of the things too we talk about with just value and understanding your value, especially if you're inexperienced, is if you are inexperienced, everything will take longer. It will cost more, and the result probably won't be as good. But those things are important to know up front. And I think even, I like to talk about even the sales side of it, right? I think that's something that's worth calling out to customers too. Like if you're winning clients early on in the process, just speaking to like where you're at, I think can actually set you up for success of like, hey, I am a little bit less expensive up front, but I'm going to do an excellent job and I'm going to follow through on value and get you like the final product. I think that could be something that could be even a sales tool for your friends and family or referrals, I guess, that you're getting to build experience.
It's so tempting for the more sales inclined people that are listening to the show where you're really good at selling something. We're going to be amazing. We're going to do a great job. We're going to make it feel like this is not even a remodel. Yeah. It's going to be so good that best ever, Donald Trump, where it's going to be terrific. Yeah. And I think there's a temptation to oversell. And it's so, we've learned over and over again that underselling, under-repping is so much more advantageous to you as a person, as a business, to be like, I think we can get to this quality level when you can exceed it.
Right.
We think we can do this and you exceed it. Give yourself margin to do better than instead of the best you could possibly do is what you already sold. Yeah. Why would you put yourself under that level of pressure instead of just being in a position where you can exceed what you more or less are committing to when you tell somebody this is what we can do? Yeah,
that's good. I think one of the questions that comes to mind is, if you are inexperienced, you're listening to this podcast and you're like, man, I don't have the experience, but I want to get the experience. How do you go about making money while you actually learn how to get great?
It's a fantastic question. And it's not easy to make money while you learn.
Yeah.
People that go to college usually earn money in an unrelated field. If you're studying to be an engineer, you're not engineering while you're in college to become an engineer and getting paid to do it.
You're paying to go learn.
You're paying to become an engineer.
Right.
And then the side, you're, busboy at a restaurant or you're doing some other manual labor or something that, minimum wage type of a job in order to become an engineer and pay for that schooling. And so I think the tendency, if we do have an oversimplification mindset, we kind of discount the value of experience.
Right.
And I think if you want to make money learning something new, there's a couple of key things you want to have in mind. And one is, do you have the capacity to learn something new? If there's people relying on you, if you have a family, you have kids, you have, you have to make a certain level of income in order to pay those bills. Yeah. And you might not have the capacity to learn something new. When I say something new, all of us should be learning new things and improving our knowledge. But I'm talking about fundamentally, I'm going to go from being a drywaller to being a framing carpenter. Yeah. And I know nothing about that.
Right.
Is that a wise decision? When you have people counting on you, have responsibility. Or I want to go stop being a carpenter and become a doctor. Well, that's going to take time, and somebody's going to have to pay those bills. And so I think that's a key thing that should keep us from the temptation to just bite off too much. Some of us are more, we want to learn. We want to just learn, constantly improve ourselves. And maybe you don't have the capacity to do that. So that's number one. Yeah. Do you have the capacity to learn?
That's good. I think one of the things I think of too is like, obviously we're talking about inexperience, right? So somebody's going in their apprentice level or they haven't done, construction very much. They haven't done the reps, I guess. But there's also probably an element to somebody who does have experience and is being asked to do something that they haven't done before on projects that also speaks into this whole learning thing that we're talking about
Mm-hmm.
of like, even your experienced people. I think that there's some relevance to what we're saying of
Yep.
like learning new trades, for example, learning to do, custom millwork. I don't know, whatever
Yes.
it is,
Yeah.
but there's the learning element that it's like you got to count the cost there too.
Mm-hmm. You had mentioned something at the beginning of the show where things take longer, they cost more when you don't have experience. And as experienced professionals, when you have a set of skills and then you're deviating from that, that's something to keep in mind. It costs more, it takes longer, as opposed to just assuming something's going to happen. And this is back to that whole smart people tend to underestimate how
Sure.
hard something is because, well, we're really good at something else. You look at a college level athlete that's great at football and then he goes to play ping pong and says, how hard could this be? I'll just dominate and he realizes he knows nothing about it.
Right.
And
right.
so that's the temptation sometimes. So it's a great call out
Yeah.
that the experienced pro can also be a novice
Yeah.
in something else that he does not know.
Yeah. And we're not trying to talk you guys out of learning new things either. I know it
100%.
kind of
You
feels
should be
that way.
learning.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, and I think it's just counting the cost, right?
Yeah.
Realizing
Difficult.
there's an inefficiency, realizing this is something different. Do
Yeah.
you want to do that? Is the gain there? Is the reward there for that level of investment?
Yeah.
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 So like the preparation, right? Is
Yes.
it can be done, but should you do it? Is
Right.
kind of the question.
Yeah. So, I think digging in even a little bit more on that question, how do you provide value in some areas, but then also learning in others?
It's
what's
a
your
great
perspective
call
on
out
that?
because you do need to, what do people pay for? When you hire a contractor, you hire a trades professional to do something. It's not about dollars per hour. It shouldn't be.
Right.
Sometimes it comes down to that.
Yeah.
But it shouldn't be. It should never be about this is, he's $50 an hour and he's 20. And
Mhm.
that's straight up. It's a value proposition of being like, I
Mhm.
need something done.
Right.
So fundamentally, when somebody hires somebody else to do something,
Yep.
they're saying, well, I need something done. And that is the value that they bring to me. And so it's being, well, you might be really good at one thing, but not good at something else. And so they compensate each other somewhat of being
Right.
like, okay, I'm a novice at this particular trade, but I want to learn something else. I want to expand my skill set.
Mhm.
You think about the trim example,
Yeah.
where somebody's like, they can set doors really good.
Mhm.
They can trim out windows, but they've never done arches and they've never
Mhm.
done custom feature work,
Right.
this high-end trim type of things. It's like, well, I can provide value in one spot, but I want to learn the other. And recognizing, well, until you get mastery of that other skill,
Right.
you're not going to have the value proposition. So
Yeah.
maybe there's that level of, okay, I do have value. And so
Yeah.
now the question becomes, if you don't have a value proposition, if you're not good at something, then what are you doing? Like maybe you should be working
Yeah.
for somebody else, not out on your own. Maybe you should be an apprentice,
Yeah.
gain the skill set. Maybe you should be in a trade school
Yeah.
until you have that base level of understanding and call it education.
Yeah. Well, how you learn it and make money
Yes.
is that
Yes.
you work for somebody else too and create that value.
Yeah.
Build that experience and then you're getting paid to
Yeah.
learn also.
And for anybody who's pushing back against that, of being like, well, I'll just learn as I go, and there's merit to that. There's
Sure.
a lot of people listening to the show that's the way they have learned. The
Yep.
school of hard
Yeah,
knocks. I've learned a ton of
absolutely.
things that way myself too.
Yep.
But it's painful.
Yeah.
And I think calling out too, being like, if you're going to go that direction, recognize the pain involved, but also recognize that's just not an efficient way of learning either.
Yeah.
And you also will create the ceiling for yourself because you're the educator.
Mhm.
The school of hard knocks is teaching you things as opposed to somebody that has mastery of it.
Right.
Think about all the things that I've really got good at. They've been in a field where somebody else is much better than that at that than I am,
Mhm.
who I can say, that I would have never even thought of that. That's how you do that. All these little secrets, all these little tricks and things that you never think of doing
Mhm.
that by being around a master. And if you never have that experience, you really do yourself a huge disservice from
Mhm.
growth later on.
Yeah.
And so by never being an apprentice, by never having somebody else hold your hand, so to speak, and say, this is how it's done, then you limit your ceiling.
Yeah. Well, and yeah, the level of excellence that you can fulfill too.
Yes.
Because it's like you're going to learn it one way, but then you might learn it the wrong way. So then you're repeating the wrong, way to do
Bad
something.
experiences.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
I remember one time the old sort of like adage, practice makes perfect. And somebody challenged that, said, no, practice makes permanent. You learn the wrong thing and then keep repeating it, practicing the wrong thing.
Yeah.
It's why some people, like I have this friend of mine who's amazing at tennis, and he played like for 6 months and he was on the same level as I, which is annoying as heck.
Yeah.
Like I've been playing for years and he's just
quick
on
learner.
the same
He's
level
good,
in 6 months. He never learned anything wrong.
Yeah.
He had good coaching from day one.
Right.
As opposed for me, I'm thinking I learned some of these things myself, self-taught technique. Why does my elbow hurt here? Why does this? And that's similar. Like where you can feel like, well, I have 10 years of experience, but really, if you were around a master, you have 6 months.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah,
it's scary.
It is scary. It is scary, but I think it's worth calling out.
Yeah,
and I think too, like just even kind of circling back on the like, what responsibilities do you have? I just think that that's something that's really worth calling out, because it's like before you take on risk for your family, for your life, if you're 25, and can go learn and not have to make a ton of money, in order to learn, then that could be a great scenario for you to make the leap, and continue like learn on the job. You have low overhead, things like that. But if you have a family to support, I think that kind of coming back on that point of make sure that is something that obviously you've talked about as a family and it works for the responsibilities that you have in front of you. And
that game plan of how do I get from novice to master, where if you can count the cost of doing that and how do you float the cost of that. And even if you're young, if somebody's, teenager listening to this show, I mean, get after it in the sense of like you have a prime opportunity to really learn skills that very few people have. I'm grateful to my dad for taking me along on all these little projects when I was a kid. Nobody expected anything of me. I think I was 9 or 10 years old, and he took me to this 11,000 square foot house that he was trimming out. And he had me putting doorknobs on, trained me in the process, had me putting doorknobs in. And the builder came by and he said, "What's he doing here?" And with this, obviously not too pleased. And my dad said, "Calm down, we'll watch him." And he did. What's he doing with my doors is what that builder's thinking to himself. And my lock sets.
Why is that guy on the job? Why is a 9-year-old?
And I wasn't exactly like, I hadn't had my growth spurt until I was probably late teens. And so I probably looked like I was, 7 or something like that, running around his house, putting lock sets in. But how about an opportunity though? Like the fact that I could get a lock set passing grade, that builder's thinking that's ridiculous. But to, if you're at 20, you expect that. Like, what's wrong with that person? They can't do it. Or, 30, like, if you can't accomplish that. So I think it's an interesting paradigm, isn't it?
It's also, it reminds me of, we went to the Build Show Live, a few months ago. And it reminds me of, I can't remember their names. The guy, the electrician we were talking to on the bus on the way to the job site, and his son came, with him. And like his son was just eager to learn, which was just so exciting to see. I think it's such an opportunity for, multi-generational business, like to tee your kids up for success, to take over, like leave a legacy, some of those kinds of things, like being able to build that relationship though, to where, the son respects the dad and like wants to learn and apprentice under the dad. That's not always going to work.
It's true.
Obviously.
It's
but
true.
But it was just a really cool, example of what you're talking about. But he was a little older, I think. But it was a fun scenario. He's like, I'm just expected to learn.
Yeah.
And anything that you do is added value to the company and to the relationship too.
It's funny how we, as you're saying that, Kinsey, the things that we, more or less the experiences we have sometimes teach us about like what's normal. And we assume, in his case, working for a dad who's a master electrician is normal.
Right.
Being able to have the opportunity to apprentice under a master electrician is normal. That's an everyday occurrence for him because that's his life. And, I did not see that as unique in my life.
Right.
I have a dad that's taking me to a job site because that's just, and to me, it's almost being like, I'd rather be playing games.
Right.
But you look back at it and like, that's a unique experience that very few kids have had.
Yeah.
So anyway, sometimes we just discount those things that we don't know are, even the people that I've hired that have worked under me, sometimes they didn't value, the opportunities either. And I'm not to judge them for that, but nonetheless, it's normal. I have a job. I have somebody that's investing in me. Doesn't everybody do that?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
not everybody does that.
Not everybody does.
That's good. Okay. So how do you value services maybe in a market that you lack experience? Like how do you actually practically value your services?
Get down to brass tacks here.
Practical.
Yeah. Practically speaking, you guys are like, okay, well, I don't have the experience yet, but I can't afford to give my services away.
Right.
So we started this podcast with this story of this $150 an hour overvalued service. And I think it's so easy to just think about the business side of, be able to charge for something, make money doing it, cover your overhead, have a profit, all that kind of thing is a sound business, right? And we want to get there.
Right.
But there's like the baby steps involved to get to that point. That solid business comes at some point,
right?
But like we can't expect it from day one. So from getting right into it of it's sometimes okay to be cheap. It's sometimes okay to not be making money. It's sometimes okay to even lose money in exchange for
It feels
learning.
so wrong you saying that on this podcast, because so often we're like, you have to know your costs, make sure you make money on the job. But I know we're prefacing with a different audience, a different moment. It's a different scenario we're talking to, but it feels so wrong to hear you say that.
Heresy. Kick him off the show. What is this guy doing here? Did something hit him on the head?
Yeah. 2025 is not a good year for that. I'm just kidding.
Early onset of something. And I think there's some wisdom to this. And I think what you can do by overcharging is you can price yourself out of learning opportunity. Mm-hmm. You can price yourself out of opportunity for growth, because what I was thinking to myself when this individual gave me, say, I'm going to charge $150 an hour is I can't hire him. Right. He's only been in business for less than 2 years. He doesn't have the experience and skills yet. He's not worth that yet. Yeah. And so he's pricing himself out of the market. Mm-hmm. And now I'm looking for somebody else who's more reasonable. Right. Now, he's also probably thinking to himself, well, the going rate is for what I want to be as opposed to what you're at now. And I think let's look at the scenarios for a plumber. Mm-hmm. What should a plumber charge? Dollars per hour. Well, it could vary from the very basic apprentice, $20 an hour, to some specialized master plumber at $150 an hour. Yeah. Well, what's a fair wage? What should you be charging? Well, it's like we have to take a step back before we make any assumptions to figure out what's fair. And I think this is a level, this is back to the value proposition as well. I mean, the market conditions are going to determine some of this and so on and so forth. So it's not as simple as, well, what's the market offering? Mm-hmm. The other thing we have to recognize is the consumer is, when they recognize somebody that does not have reputation or experience yet, or just getting started, there's risk involved with hiring that person to do something, because they recognize, well, he's never done that before. Right. And you don't want to be deceptive about that either. You don't want to pretend you have 10 years of experience when you have one, because that's a recipe for disaster too. But nonetheless, somebody's accurately portraying themselves of like, I've been doing this for a year. The consumer comes along, they're making a decision between them and somebody's been doing for 15. Mm-hmm. If the guy that comes back that's been doing it for 15 years represents themselves well, and it's twice the price, and they know it's going to be done right, there's a real strong value proposition to just hiring that guy to get it done right the first time, instead of going to school with the guy that's learning. Yeah. So that's your competition sometimes, is the guy that has been in business for a very long time. Yeah. But nonetheless, he's more expensive. And you're thinking to yourself, how did that guy get the job? He was twice as expensive as I was. Mm-hmm. And that's the thing that sometimes gets missed. It's not about price. Right. It's about value. Yeah. And I think so more specifically of like, let's take inventory of like what you have going for you as a young, inexperienced, soon to be pro. Yeah. Well, you've got energy, passion. You want to learn, right? Mm-hmm. You have hustle, you have work ethic. Yeah. Like you need those things going for you to kind of compensate for that. Yeah. And hopefully you have a very like low overhead. Like don't invest in a new truck. Yeah. Don't scale your business yet until you have experience, until you have a good service offering, value offering, right? So, hey, those tools that you want to buy, hold off on that. Mm-hmm. Keep the tool set minimal. Don't overinvest in your business until you really have a strong value offering, because the overhead's low. You don't want to be spending $20 an hour for your tools when you're only worth $30 or $40 an hour. Yeah. So keep that low. Keep the expenses there, and I think that's something you'll have in your positive category of things you got going for you. There's also a real temptation to think we kind of get ahead of ourselves sometimes, and I know this from firsthand experience. I should be working for this clientele. I want to be working for high-end people. Yeah. I want to be doing amazing work, but I'm not qualified to do that yet. Mm-hmm. We need a certain level of contentment of being, okay, here's where the step one is. I'm going to go work in that not so exciting home for a not so exciting client, doing something that's sort of not worthy of your talent, so to speak, but you're gaining experience potentially, but also looking for opportunities where you can level up, but not just have the pressure of leveling up either.
Yeah. Oh, that's good.
Yeah. And I think the other piece of it is it fair that you're charging significantly less for something when you don't have experience? I mean, sometimes that is the fair thing. Mm. Now, let's not get stuck here. Let's not say this is right long term, but this is a way of, instead of going to school, you're going to the school of hard knocks, so to speak. Yeah. You're gaining that experience on your own. You're investing, you're learning, growing. And give you a story of that. When I was about, I think 18 or 19 years old, I had a technology business. And I came back, and a mentor of mine, when I told him what I was going to charge, he said, oh, that's way too cheap. And what he looked at was market conditions. He said, most guys, technicians, are charging this rate. Mm-hmm. And he said, what you should be charging is this. So he sounded like our podcast and said, you know, you need to be charging more money. You need to run a sustainable business. However, I was 18.
Yeah.
I'd only been doing it for a year.
I
did not have the experience. I did not have the value proposition.
Yep.
So the fair thing for me to do is actually charge what I was worth at the time, which is probably, you know, a very reasonable, like, you know, less than half of what others were charging.
Right.
Because I was still learning and growing.
Mm-hmm. And it would be a good experience for you.
Amazing experience. And then I'm not pricing myself out of the market. So what I had done instead, I wish I could say I did the right thing, but I had gone with that advice. Seemed to make sense. Mm-hmm. Charged them full rate and never heard one word back from them.
Yeah,
they paid me and that was it.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, they were reputable in the sense of like, he invoiced that ridiculous amount and we'll never talk to him again.
Yeah. You're never getting another job.
Never getting another job, as opposed to being like, okay, he needed to, you know, he's learning, growing, he's hungry, he's passionate, he's got all those things going for him. He's got the low overhead, he's, you know, and he did a good job and he's less than the other guy that was twice as much money. Yeah. And let's give him more work. Yeah. And meanwhile, we have another project. I'm gaining experience.
Yeah. No, that's a really good call out. I think one of the things though too is you're talking about this progression of like value should be progressive, right? Like you should be constantly improving. You should be constantly learning. And so then I think another point to discuss is really how do you gauge or continue gauging where you're at, you know, with things in terms of like the value that you're providing and, you know, the prices that you're charging and things like that. Like how often do you come back to that? Like what's your experience in some of that?
You're absolutely right. It's not stagnant. We should never be stuck in a position where this is our you know, rate we have to, you know, go with, and you know, we should be reflecting back on it. So to your point, yes, 100% true. And I think there's a tendency as well of looking for external motivations to direct what we should be charging. I kind of gave an example one before, but the other one would be, well, how much money do I need to make? So you look at your bills and you say, well, I need to make $35 an hour in order to cover myself. So that's what I need to charge.
Yeah.
That's a dangerous mistake to make because that could be too cheap or too expensive. Like you might not even be worth $35 an hour yet.
Yeah.
Or you could be worth twice that.
Yeah.
So it's dangerous.
Yeah.
The other thing would be to look at, well, what are other people charging? This is also dangerous. We want to get really tied to value as opposed to dollars per hour. Back to the $20 to $150 an hour example, where things are not just that simple. So let's kind of break it down a little bit more so you can kind of get to you know, the going rate or what I need to charge.
Yeah, I think that the thing I'm thinking about when you're saying some of this is like, this is such a hard concept to know because nobody's going to tell you where you should be. Your customers are just not going to hire you. They're going to ghost you. They're going to hire you for a project, never hire you again. You know what I mean? So it's like the target is moving on some of the value, like how much to charge. What is my value proposition standpoint? People are not going to be like, hey, you're worth this.
Yes.
You know, like you have to figure it out.
Yes. It's a good point. I remember working for a guy trimming out his cabin and him telling me, I hired an electrician to finish this project out. I was just doing the trim work for him. And he said, electricians should be $30 an hour. This guy wanted $50. Can you believe it? Like he was ripping him off.
Yeah.
And the electrician fell into the trap of associating his value with dollars per hour.
Right.
And so he had two electricians. One was $30 per hour. Another one was $50. And suddenly he got associated with per hour. Like, do you want your life to be connected to how many hours you worked on something? If you get to the level of proficiency where you get 4 times as much done as another guy, do you want it tied to the value proposition somebody else has in the same hour? No, you don't. Both directions, both when you don't know something and when you get to mastery. Yeah. And so like this whole example of, you know, often we look at the $20 to $150 an hour, we're like, well, I'm not worth $150. I shouldn't be making $300,000 a year doing that, clearly, you know. But a fair wage would be 50, you know, like that would be about right. So I'll charge 50. It's kind of in the middle somewhere, you know, like I'm kind of, you know, not over, I'm not gouging anybody. It's fair. But you know, let's kind of take an inventory of experience, like how well, if you're a plumber, how well do you know the codes? Best practices, how well do you get the job done? And then efficiency. This is a huge one. How fast do you get the job done right? Do you get it done the first time? And then your personal capacity is probably the number one factor in what you're worth. Some guys hustle. They show up and they are on it 100% every hour of the day. Some are just take an hour to figure it out, hour to wind down. They're 50% of what somebody else gets done. Yeah. And so that kind of determines your value proposition.
Yeah. Sorry, this is making me think of a story. I think it was from our podcast. This would have been a couple years ago, a podcast with Richard McMurray. And Richard was doing, or maybe Brent Hull was talking about it, because Brent Hull kind of took Richard under his wing a little bit of like, hey, you're so good, recognized his talent, recognized his skill, recognized his value, even though Richard didn't know. Like, he was winning jobs, smaller jobs, cheaper jobs, things like that, because he was still, in his mind, building value, like, I'm building the value offering that I have. So it's making me think, like, for the experienced contractors who are listening to this episode, like, if you're utilizing trade contractors and things like that, I'm like, the mentorship of calling your subs to greatness, of like, hey, no, you have the ability to fulfill and others don't, because it's very hard to be humble and, you know what I mean, and know where you're at, know where you should be, know exactly what you should charge. And so it's just making me think about, Brent Hull was saying that Richard was doing excellent work and you're charging way too little. Is what Brent said to him. And so I don't know. It's just like that moment of like, sometimes it requires a call to greatness.
That's good.
Because some people don't actually think that they are worth it. And so anyway, if you have experience and you've worked with a lot of subs, like, I would just suggest calling I know that's also like a catch-22, because a lot of GCs are like, no, I'm going to make a better percent or get a lower price if my subs charge me very little. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's that catch-22.
I've done that before. There was a drywall contractor that worked for me, and I probably mentioned this on the podcast before even, but he was not just a efficient person. He got things done, and he was pretty inexpensive, but he was just the kind of guy, though, that when I needed something done, he was on it. Yeah. I remember one time we were trying to finish up a project. I need drywall patchwork done, and everything else was done, and it just needs some patching done. It was not even a project he had done. And I said, I've got this patching done. Can you take care of it? Later that afternoon, he just knocked it out and done. He just sent me a bill for like $50. And I'm like, he took hours out of his day to go patch something, charged me $50 to do it. Yeah. Just showing up cost him more than $50.
For sure.
And so I'm thinking to myself, well, he's being taken advantage of by me. Now, obviously, he's the one that's telling me that's what
it's his fault, not your fault.
Yeah. But nonetheless, that's in essence what's happening. I'm not, and I think there's a certain level of responsibility you have as somebody with experience, with somebody that also is paying for value, to not take advantage of that person, because eventually he will recognize. It's sort of like an employee if he's underpaid, and at some point somebody else offers them, a different job somewhere for, significantly more money. And then you come back and say, I'll match that. I'll give you more. And it's like, what? Like, you had all these years to pay me what I was worth, and you never told me that.
Yeah. It's that, or he's going to go out of business because he's not making money too.
That too. Yeah.
And then you can't keep a good sub because he's not profitable.
I'm thinking of two examples in my head. One person, two people, well, as a contrast, one guy, very talented, let's put it this way, both guys very talented. One with hustle and another very delicate with his movements. I tell my brothers, when they, movements per minute, like this is MPMs, you got RPMs for your drill and FPMs for your saws, and, rotations per minute is your RPMs. And, but it's like MPMs is about like movements per minute. Sometimes there's a hasty, accident prone, dangerous level of movement. And then there's a efficient, clockwork-like getting things done. And then you got somebody that just wants to sit back and, it's pretty good, and like, and it's not getting things done. And the contrast of, the one guy is making $150 an hour, realized he's not charging his customer that because it would seem stupid. But that's what at the end of the day, that's what he's taking home. And he's making fantastic money, a solo guy on his own, just crushing it as a trim carpenter. And then you got the other guy barely paying his bills, constantly in debt, constantly going broke, constantly, and what's the difference? Both amazingly talented people, MPMs.
Yeah. That's good.
So there's a level of that being a part of your value proposition. Can you hustle?
Yeah.
The other thing I think we can't forget as a part of setting a value proposition is market conditions. A very highly competitive market. Everybody's doing it. Yeah. Well, it's competitive. If you want to work, you're going to have to compete against everybody and his brother that's doing the same thing.
Right.
And sometimes very easy to get in industries are that way sometimes. If you're operating a cleaning service or something like that, what sets you apart from somebody else that can just bring or a painter, you know, like what sets you apart from somebody else who just shows up with a brush and roller? Can you deliver an exceptional product, exceptional result?
Yeah.
Versus just like, I'll paint too. I'll get it done.
We can all paint.
Yeah, right. Anybody can paint.
Everybody can paint.
Yeah, which is not
oversimplifying.
True. So not true. So not
Back
true.
to the oversimplifying
yes,
concept.
Right. So many people have made that mistake. Homeowners, oh, I'll paint it. Don't worry about that.
Yeah.
Oh, please don't ruin our job.
Yeah.
Don't paint it, please. Can we please paint it? Yes.
It's good.
Kind of carrying on this theme, I think, because I hadn't really practically answered the question, right?
No,
I mean, it's
we're still getting there. Practically, though.
Practically speaking, how do we set our
It's hard
value?
too.
It is hard.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's the taking inventory piece. And I think there's a couple of questions you need to ask yourself. And that is, how did you learn what you know about something specifically? We talked about this earlier, but did you learn from somebody that really knew what they were doing?
Yeah.
Or did you self-learn? Is that even a proper way of saying it? Anyway, you self-taught.
Yeah.
You basically, you went out there, figured it out, went to the school of hard knocks, or you had somebody that was just sort of a novice or just mid-level, and they were the one that taught you how to do it.
Yeah.
And so it's almost like if I learned a foreign language from somebody that wasn't all that good at it, they taught me all of their mistakes, all of their wrong grammar and everything else, and now that's my limit for what I know about that language.
Right.
As opposed to somebody that knew it really, really well and said, no, this is the proper way to say it. This is the correct usage of these different verbs, et cetera. And so I think there's an aspect of that being like, how did you learn? So just straight up, a master, novice, self-taught.
Yeah.
The other piece is, what specialized tools or training do you have? Because that's adding value.
Right.
If you have thousands of dollars of tools and you've gone through these courses or whatever else, that's adding value.
Yeah.
And then back to the oversimplifying thing, we tend to make things easier than they are. So if you put yourself in a lineup of 10 people and all of them were your trade and they all were dedicated to their craft, where would you fit in that lineup? Like, would you be dead last of just being like, barely making the grade, or would you really rank well in that group of people?
Yeah.
Of the people you respect and know that are masters at it, where would you fit in that group?
Yeah.
So,
well, there's a level of being honest with yourself. That's hard to be like, well, I'm last.
Swallow the ego.
It's hard to say that, but I think that's what we're talking about though, is like, you have to gauge where you're at. You have to like be honest with yourself and just call it what it is today. Like, you can grow and you can improve your value tomorrow, but today call it what it is. And then let's work towards growth.
Understanding the value of experience. So let's update our value statement or value, like what you charge, practically speaking, off of this. And so market conditions, economic conditions, and then your value proposition. So it shouldn't be per hour if we can get away from that. Now, one of the biggest reasons why people go per hour is because they want to limit their losses. Right. And this comes back to estimating. If you have no idea how long something should take, then you're going to say, I'll do it by hour. And that way I will always make
covered
$50 an hour and I will never lose money. But if you can somehow get that tied to a value proposition, this requires you taking it one step further. So maybe starting off with an hourly and then recognize, okay, what I can deliver in value for a particular service, I can get really, really good at that. And now what was taking me 5 hours and fair at $50 an hour, what somebody was paying $250 for, and market conditions say that's about right, and economic conditions say people will pay for it. Now you're saying I can get that done in 2. So instead of having this thing where it's $50 per hour, it's $125 per hour for the same service. Yeah. So that's where we want to get to.
It's a fixed cost of,
And so it's like, how can we take the service offering compared to what the market conditions, the economic conditions, and sort of fair rate would be for some task? Yeah. Getting it tied to tasks instead of getting tied to hours. Yeah. And I think this is where, to speak to every single trade and to speak to every different industry, we wouldn't be able to do that on this podcast. Right. But I think hopefully this is a tool you guys could use to analyze, where are you at in that whole lineup of skills and experiences. How efficient are you? Where's the hustle at? And this is the level of where you can even grow and improve, and then hopefully arrive at a number where you say, okay, well, that's a fair number, and for that particular service. And the market conditions kind of set some of that in one respect, but also you're able to set some of that by your hustle, your grind, your ability to deliver, using your brain power. Yeah,
it sounds like, really, like, if we were to oversimplify that concept, your speed and your quality is kind of a factor that determines where your value's at, is what it seems like from the formula that you're talking about. 100%. Of like, if you can build a staircase in half the time as the other guy, you should still be charging the same, if not more, than the other guy. and building it in half the time.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think I want to help our audience too with the other guy. Mm-hmm. And you're 100% right with like that market condition, but don't oversimplify that piece either of being like, well, I know a guy.
That's good.
I knew somebody that was thinking about going into window installation. And his other guy was the guy down the street who installed windows for $100 a piece. Mm-hmm. And I challenged him on that and said, I want you to go over to 3 other window installers and get a quote from them on a project. And what he found from that just blew his mind.
Yeah.
That was not $100 a window at all.
No.
It was $1,500 a window.
Right.
And because they were insured, they set up, they cleaned up, they had the right equipment, they had a trained crew, they had delivered consistent results. Mm-hmm. That's value proposition that somebody's paying for. Not some guy that says, man, I got to pay my bills.
Right.
$100 seems about right.
Yeah.
I'm not very good at this, but I need to feed my family.
Yeah.
And so $100 a window, I'm going to take 4 hours a window, and as opposed to a guy that's in there a whole day, changes every window out in the house and makes $50,000.
That's a great call out. Be careful with the other guy you're looking at.
Yeah.
Don't be looking at another guy. No,
right. Yeah. Who's the other guy? Yeah. Got to be careful there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And then we've talked about this a little bit, but just for people who are established, we have a lot of listeners on here who have been running their own businesses for a while. How would you practically say, how could they help others, gain skills and grow who may be apprentices on their team or, that they're mentoring in other ways? Like what are some tips, or thoughts you'd give to those guys?
I'm grateful for the people that have given me opportunity to fail gracefully. Even with my wife, she's done that for me as well, of just being able to be that kind person that says, instead of holding me to a standard of excellence first try, it's being like, you're growing.
Yeah.
And similar to the way my 10-year-old son, when he takes on a project, and I'm saying, great job, son, you made an effort, you went for it, and you accomplished something that is now the stepping stone for greater results. As an experienced pro, we tend to discount all of the experiences we went through to get to mastery.
True.
Back to the 10,000 cuts type of scenario, where I'm saying minimum 10,000 cuts later, you can now deliver consistently quality results. Well, I don't want to think about that. I want to just give myself a pat on the back and think about how good I am. That
feels to forget
better.
Hard things.
Right, right. So we all tend to just oversimplify as experienced pros what was involved to get us to the point of mastery.
It's good.
And so that prevents us from coming alongside somebody. And we're impatient. We want them to be excellent. How hard? I mean, we need results. We need people to step up and deliver. I just hired you 2 weeks ago. I need you cranking it out.
Yeah.
And also, I think the other piece about it, in order to have that work, you've got to start new hires in such a way where they have opportunity to fail and where you can set a wage that has margin for that in order for them to actually grow into something more. Now, that might be where the first 2 weeks later after you hire them, you're saying, I'm way underpaying you. Here's a double. You can always double somebody's salary. You can't take it away from them.
Yeah. And I would also say a path to training to where it's like super clear in terms of how do they excel? How do they grow? What are the standards that you're expecting from them? Hey, by 2 weeks in, where am I supposed to be? What are you expecting? That kind of thing.
Expectations destroy relationships. The thing that is so tempting is just to assume things will happen a certain way. This really is another podcast episode in of itself, and bringing up the next group. We've had several recently. I was just thinking about like Brad's whole
Brad Levitt,
Brad Levitt, like talking about growing his team.
Yeah.
There's definitely a much more to this aspect of it, but I think let's not make the mistake when you gain mastery in something to just make it seem like commonplace.
Everybody else should have it.
Everyone else should just be doing this. Because it's so tempting to do that and just look down at everyone else.
That's good. Yeah. That's good. What other final thoughts you got?
I think this has been a fun episode to go through.
Yeah.
It just reminds me of some of the things that I want to forget, the learning experiences.
So fun. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh man, learning how to tape drywall. Oh, who wants to do that? Who wants to be the new kid that's doesn't know how to frame anything or trim anything or hang drywall? It's not fun.
No.
You don't want to remember that
sucks
stuff.
to be the beginner. Yeah.
Oh man, just
the freshman in high school.
Right. Who wants to be that? But I think there's a certain level of, in reflecting back, I started thinking about, okay, we're not necessarily serving our audience correctly by just always talking about 2-3 years in.
Yeah.
We need to start those the first steps.
You're right.
And sometimes we can do ourselves a big disservice by overcharging when really we should be grateful for opportunity. I'll leave you guys with one final story. I had done a project and we lost money. And my team was quite frustrated by it. They were mad at that client. And they were just like, we're being cheated. This should not have happened that way. And I remember thinking to myself, but boy, did we level up. Boy, did we learn a lot. And we won't do that again.
Yeah.
And I think to myself, that's the value of experience.
Yeah. I felt that way. I played college volleyball, obviously. Totally different context, obviously, and experience than construction. But gosh, I can't remember what grade I was in. I think I was maybe 8th grade. And we played in an open qualifier, which is like the biggest tournament that you can be a part of. It's the best teams. And we went to this tournament. It was the first like national qualifier we went to. And we lost every game.
Wow.
Every single game. But to this day, I look back at that tournament and I say, I learned more that weekend of losing every game than I have any other tournament that we won, you know? And so anyway, similar to your point there.
Yep. Anyway. Yep. Sometimes it comes down to the value of experience. And we don't, sometimes as experienced people or as beginners, we discount it.
Yeah.
So get out there, guys, and recognize the value of experience, not just in others, but in what you will have by investing in experience and growth, and find yourself some masters that can input into your lives. I've learned so much from several mentors. And they don't even consider themselves that. They were just there.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, I consider them that because I want to respect them as that. But nonetheless, I mean, and they treated me as peers even. But I'm like, wow, that guy has experience. He's mastered something, and I like that. That's good. I want to imitate that aspect of it. And then the other mistake to avoid, not to just make this a long-winded podcast, it'll never end, folks. Yeah. But one final thought is somebody can be very good in one thing and suck at something else.
True.
Don't make the beginner mistake of just sort of like, discounting somebody because you don't like one aspect, one bad habit or something, but just be able to take something from somebody and say, wow, I love that about the guy. Good. He's coarse, he's gruff, he's mean, but boy, he's a good carpenter. And I want to learn everything I can from him.
That's good. That's good.
All right, guys.
Cool. We'll catch you next time.